Michael, congratulations on the film. It's really quite hard to categorise this one because you could say it's a thriller. There's obviously a love story in there as well. It's a psychological drama as well, I think you could say. How would you describe it?
I think that's why I fall back on calling it a, dark adult fairy tale, because sometimes just talking about it as a psychological thriller, genre terms can seem so generic in a way, and so dark, twisted adult fairy tale is what.
Why fairy tale?
Well, because it was when I started writing the film, which was kind of loosely inspired by a true case, and then I kind of went off on a tangent and invented this story. At some point, I saw that there was resonances with fairy tales. It's about seemingly innocent young women trapped within a hostile family environment. She goes into the woods and she meets a character that might be Prince Charming or might be the big bad wolf. And I just...
She's not wearing a red cape.
She's not wearing a red cape. But someone told me the other day that actually she's wearing a yellow dress, and that's what Belle in Beauty and the Beast wears. Or at least the Disney one. So maybe that was even layered in.
They're right, actually. Yes, that hadn't occurred to me.
So we didn't want to be we weren't trying to be kitsch about it, but it was trying to use or kind of have some kind of dialogue with those archetypes of fairy tales. And in some ways, at the end of the fairy tale, you have the damsel in distress who's saved by, the charming prince. And we thought, okay, maybe that could be the meeting point of this movie. Where does she go from there if this is a modern fairy tale? So I don't know. I think about it more in those terms, only because I sometimes I bristle a bit with generic genre labels. Not that genre used to be a dirty word for me, and now I've become more accustomed to it. So it's kind of those things, but I feel like it's masquerading as a genre film. Ostensibly, it's a character study, and it's used in certain genre techniques and genre sort of story frames, but really it's an investigation into this woman.
And this is your first film as a director, but as you've said, you've written the screenplay as well. I wondered why you chose to do both, because that's an awful lot to take on for your first feature, or is there no dividing line between the two for you?
I'd written a lot of my own shorts. It's quite common to write your first feature because you're not at the status yet where people are going to send you a bunch of scripts. So it's kind of partly by the circumstance you're in, and it's also, even now I want to work with writers. I'm trying to find my Paul Schrader. I think there's more talented writers out there than me, or certainly people that can do it quicker than me. But I wanted to go through this experience because writing is a big part of directing in it. It's you're having to. I think it makes you a stronger director if you can write, because you know what it takes to develop a character, or to make your middle act work, or to how you're having what you're communicating to an audience, how you're seducing them into your story. So even now, where I want to collaborate with writers, I'm really pleased that I went through this process, because I just feel like I'm a stronger director now because of it, and I'm stronger at developing other people's scripts because of it. But it's not necessarily, it was so difficult. It's not something I want to repeat in the near future, going from blank page to shooting script. It's a
daunting prospect.
I think it's half of making a film. I think you're halfway up the mountain, really. If you've written a script, that's 100 pages and it reads well, you're higher up than base camp. It's such a long, and difficult journey to get there. I've got a lot of admiration for writers. And then when you've got that 100 pages and it reads really well, it's the thing, you will get so much energy from that document. You'll be able to convince people to come onto the film, and it will constantly give you inspiration. And I don't just see it as a kind of, I'm not dismissive about screenplays. I don't just see them as a kind of very loose blueprint. I think they're, when they read well and they've mapped out a strong story and compelling characters, it's a great platform to make a film from.
You mentioned there that your background is in shorts. How else did that help you in terms of making your first feature?
Well, at film school, I was very, very eager I really wanted to become like an actor's director, let's say. I realised at some point that all my favourite films had very compelling performances. In fact, they were mostly about character. And as much as I love the aesthetics of cinema and how something looks and how it sounds, and from the art direction and sound design and music. None of that really matters if the performance isn't there and if the character isn't rich and dynamic.
What films did you have in mind?
Well, like even, there'll be classics like The Seven Samurai or Taxi Driver, Dog Day Afternoon, or that, they got, if you didn't have these rich characters at the heart of these movies.
Everything hinges on them.
Totally, yeah. And even if I never necessarily wanted to become like a kind of John Cassavetes style of, actors, director, it was the area that I wanted to work on most. So when I was at film school, I did a lot of shorts that were like very intimate, very character focused. And that just gave me, increased confidence about working with actors and trying to develop, hopefully develop characters that had like complexity to them. And I knew I was interested in aesthetics so much that would take care of itself, and I'd already met so many great heads of department at film school, the cinematographer, the editor, my sound designer, my production designer. I all met these guys at the NFTS, and we kind of watch films together, we'd argue about cinema, we obsess over it, but my personal director project was always just like, it was trying to work with characters in a deep way and work with actors and, make it a very, that collaborative experience about working with an actor. So that was really the strong preparation for me for doing this,
So where did the idea for the story came from? You mentioned earlier it was based on a true event. Tell me some more about that.
So there was a guy called was dubbed the Beast of Jersey, who committed a lot of horrific crimes in the 1960s. And he kind of got away with it for 10 years. And
so it was actually on the island itself.
Yeah.
It's that close to reality.
Yeah, and it was out of a horror film. He wore this wig and this mask and this whole outfit. He would break into people's homes at night and kidnap their children. It was unimaginable, That
sounds like another horrible fairy tale.
Yeah. He became. Even when I grew up in the 80s, it was like, he still haunted the island. He became like the bogeyman. As kids, we would tease each other. Don't go in those woods. That's where the Beast of Jersey attacks someone. So
I suppose if you're on a small island in a small community, it would last longer.
Yeah.
In fact, everybody would remember it for decades.
Yeah. And even now, it's something that's still talked about. And this happened like 50 years ago. It had an impact on my childhood imagination, I guess, because it was the first time I realised that monsters do exist. They're not just in fairy tale books. They're real people. They could be your next door neighbour. And I found that reality so incongruous with Jersey being such a safe and scenic and kind of, fairy tale like environment. And I just couldn't marry my childhood experience of the island with these crimes. And it really stuck with me.
Setting it on an island makes it really sort of insular to the point actually of claustrophobic, really.
Mm.
And in some ways, it's not actually a very flattering portrait of the island, is it? Particularly the people.
I kind of saw the film as it's a prison break movie. This is someone that's trapped on an island and then trapped within a dysfunctional family home, trapped within a very hostile relationship with her mother. She's even trapped, by her own guilt, and she needs a monster to help break her free. So when I thought these different ways of looking at the island, that is in some ways a bit of a paradise, and it is very safe, and I had a great childhood there. But I just thought it was so interesting to use it as as for some people it could be, you could feel like you were suffocated there. When I was a teenager, I certainly wanted to escape. It was only when I was in my 30s that I fell in love with the island again. And then, I took different observations I had of the island, and I kind of mined all my, all these impressions that were both good and bad, the feeling to escape, but also the sense that the love I had of the landscape and different observations I had of certain people. And of course, I've magnified them and amplified them through these, this fairy tale archetype or this crime story. And at some moment, I questioned that through the writing of this movie, whether there was like an ethical question about how I portrayed the island. But then at that time I was watching a lot of David Cronenberg films, and I looked at the way that he portrayed Toronto and I went there recently, and it's the nicest place in the
lovely
world.
place.
It's a lovely place. People
Really
are really
great
nice,
city.
but they're not when you watch his movies. And I thought, you know what, you're allowed the liberty if you know, especially if you're not setting something in present day and you're trying to make a comment. It's not Jersey in 2017 or 2016 when we shot it. You know, and it's very clear that we're using it as a canvas to, you know, we're heightening it, and it's partly a place of imagination that I just thought, you know what, I permit myself to have the liberty to realise it in any way that I see fit for the story.
You alluded earlier to the girl needing a monster to help her break free. Without giving too much away, who would you say is actually the beast of the title, or is it both of them?
It's difficult to comment on this without taking away some of what I hope is a big part of the, I don't know if you could call it enjoyment, but I really want the audience to engage with that question about who the beast is. I don't mean in the literal sense of, you know, who's committing these crimes, though there's that question as well, but just for the audience to think a bit more deeply about these characters are, you know, the characters as animals in some ways that are guided by instinct. You know, and there's so it's, you know, whether it doesn't just apply to them, but maybe it applies to every single character in the movie. You know, I suppose you could go through the film and really ask who in the film is acting out of some kind of, you know, acting morally. I don't know, I think that's an interesting question to ask for, you know, about all of the characters. And that's partly what the title's trying to reference is not only, I suppose, the fairy tale aspect, but you know, yeah, these characters are the particular species of, you know, we're Homo sapiens, and we're guided as much, but more by our instinct and our animal bodies than we like to pretend, you know, and often, you know, we think of ourselves as very rational creatures, but I think our intellect more often than not is used to kind of post-rationalise decisions that our bodies have already made. So yeah, I want to politely decline by not commenting too much about who I think the beast is, because I think
I had a feeling you might do that, but I had to try. You've got terrific performances from both Jessie Buckley and Johnny Flynn, who are comparatively new faces. Where did you find them, and how did you get them to have that electricity on the screen?
Finding them, that goes down to, I can't take credit, that's my casting director, Julie Harkin. You know, she had cast Jessie in War and Peace, the BBC adaptation. Yeah. And that actually hadn't come out when we were casting the film, but we managed to sneak into the edit to see some of her performance. And she was a really big champion for Jessie, and Jessie came in 2, maybe 3 times, and she was just so committed to the role. And it really struck me that she was the kind of person that I could see Mole becoming if she grew up in, you know, a healthier family environment. You know, Jessie's very spirited as a person. There's no airs or graces. She's just very grounded and relatable. And I thought that's interesting to get someone like that and put them in a straitjacket, and then we kind of watch them blossom through the movie, you know. And with Johnny, I mean, I knew him a bit through his music and some of his other film roles, and I couldn't quite see it. Whereas it was Julie Harkin who got me a ticket to see Johnny in The Hangman, the Martin McDonagh play, and in that he plays a kind of very charismatic but very dark, you know, sort of sociopath. It's extremely different from the other roles I'd seen him in, and I really wanted to cast an actor that would elicit the kind of shapeshifter aspect of Pascal as a character, and Johnny is someone that can be the kind of charismatic romantic lead. He can be extremely sinister. He can be the antagonist of the movie. Sometimes he's quite boyish and he seems quite wounded. Sometimes, you know, he keeps the audience on their toes about what they really think of this character. So, and the chemistry that's all down to the actors. You know, I can't say I whispered magical things in their ear and conjured up this performance that wouldn't have existed otherwise. I think it's, you know,
you just left it for them.
Yeah, I think there's sometimes a misconception about directing being you're an acting coach. Sometimes that does happen, but very often I think it's you as much a shepherd, and you're just trying to gently guide people in the right direction, but you're really, you know, letting them dictate the rhythm and, you know, the tempo and the kind of spirit and energy. And you don't want, you know, I want to give the actors a lot of space to create their characters and not kind of hem them in too much.
And you also brought in Geraldine James, who's an incredibly experienced actress. So what did she add to the dynamic?
The character of Hilary is someone that's completely convinced of her moral authority. There's not an inch of doubt in her. And we needed someone that could play that part and that could really have that status, but also had a sort of sense of playfulness and charm about them, and that the character wouldn't become one note. And I thought that you'd kind of understand how Mole was trapped in this relationship, because it's not that the mother character just constantly chastises her. She charms her as well. She says that
it's more subtle than that.
Yeah, exactly. She's convinced Mole that they're best friends. And we know that deep down that's dysfunctional. But if you've been trapped in that relationship and you've been brought up that way, it's a very difficult thing to see outside of. And Geraldine's great because she brings that charm and that wit, and she has that authority as well. And she can kind of be the antagonist, but with a smile on her face. And it just became the dynamic between them. It just sort of seemed to work so strongly.
It worked really, really well. In fact, the whole film does. Michael, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.